my judging timer ready? And my opponents?
Yeah.
Alright, let's get started. In this speech, what I'm going to be doing is first going over the affirmative case, showing you how the counterplan is going to access the affirmative team's advantages, but supersize them, you could think, because we're going to be actually using their own analysis to show you how the economic benefit is with the counterplan. Then I'm going to be going to the counterplan and answering the responses and the disadvantages presented by my opponents, and then moving to some more disadvantages to my opponent's case and showing you why the net benefit is going to be for voting with the counterplan. So let's start off with the affirmative team's case. Their first advantage was that of economic growth, and they had two impacts to this. Their first impact was that of domestic investment. My response to this is that of most competitive. Most competitive. Basically, what's going to happen is by abolishing the corporate tax altogether, you make the United States the most competitive country. Now, basically, with the affirmative team plan, they said they're going to implement a system of worldwide taxation, but the problem with that is that the corporation is going to get taxed if they stay in the other country or if they come to the United States. There's no incentive for that corporation to move back to the United States. However, by reducing the corporate tax to zero, we see empirical evidence of corporations given a huge incentive because there's no corporate tax rate, which means they'll all bring their profits back to the United States. Their second impact here, though, was that of FDI. And they had a really good piece of evidence here. My response to this argument is, you can tag as a number, 129.5%. 129.5%. Now, their own analysis said that a study found that foreign direct investment increases 3.7% for every 1 percentage point decrease in the corporate tax rate. Using that analysis, if you do the math and look to what happens if you abolish the current 35% corporate tax rate, you get 129.5% FDI investment versus the affirmative team's 37.5%. That is a huge economic net benefit to be voting for the counterplan. Let's move to their second advantage, though. Their second advantage talked about reducing the deficit. I have three responses here. My first response is $33 billion increase. $33 billion increase. Now, according to Lawrence Hunter with the Orange County Register in 2012, said repealing the corporate tax would very likely lead to increased revenue for the government. Without this massive burden, the private industry would grow much faster. Ending the corporate income tax would generate sufficient increases in GDP that overall federal revenues would increase approximately $33.3 billion annually. So basically, if you want to be talking about the deficit, we can give you specific numbers talking about how the counterplan is going to increase revenue $33.3 billion. My second response to this, though, is no affirmative number. No affirmative number. Now, they came up here and read evidence saying they're going to increase revenues, but never are they able to give you a specific number to weigh against the $33.3 billion that we generate with the counterplan. My third and final response, though, is empirically proven. Empirically proven. Now, according to the same source that Brandon read in his speech, when Estonia abolished their corporate tax, they actually saw increases in federal revenue. So not only is there studies saying if we did this in the United States, we would see $33.3 billion in increased revenue, but when other countries have done this, they have also seen increases in revenue. So really, if you really want to talk about deficit reduction, you'd always be voting for the negative team because we're going to be the ones that decrease the deficit the most. With that said, though, showing you how the affirmative plan is really going to be solving for the harms presented by my opponents, let's move to the counterplan. Now, they had four main arguments against the counterplan. They said it's topical, they argued one of our reasons to prefer, and ran two disadvantages. I'm going to start off at the top of the flow when they said the counterplan was topical. I have 5 responses here. My first response is that it's real world. It's real world. You can imagine right now if Congress was debating and let's say Obama passes Obamacare legislation and Paul Ryan came up and presented a counter healthcare legislation, would they ever reject Paul Ryan's proposal because it was on the topic of healthcare? Absolutely not. Just like in the real world, you would never reject a policy because it was on the topic that we're debating. In the same way, team policy debates should emulate the real world, and because we presented a better solution to the affirmative team's plan, we would urge you to be voting for that solution. My second response, though, is that of parametrics. Now, what parametrics basically argues is that the plan is the focus of the debate. We haven't argued topicality against the affirmative plan, so once they pass their plan becomes the interpretation, how they interpret the resolution for today's debate. So that's really what the resolution has boiled down to, how they boiled down the resolution. Therefore, anything that is counter to the affirmative team's plan, that is not their plan, is therefore not the resolution. It is counter to the plan. It is a different argument. It's no longer under the jurisdiction of what the resolution is for today's debate. The resolution for the affirmative team is interpreting is corporate tax reduction. We're dealing with corporate tax abolition. They're completely different. My third response, though, is that the plan is the focus. The plan is the focus. Now, according to the Stoa rules, the negative team is under absolutely no burden whatsoever to negate the resolution. Now, the rules were recently rewritten just a few months ago, and basically what they said is that the affirmative team has to uphold the resolution. There is no specific burden for the negative team. Therefore, the negative team can negate the resolution, but they can also negate the affirmative team's plan. That is the course of action we've taken in today's debate to negate the plan presented by my opponents. My fourth response, though, is that of no abuse. No abuse. Now, I've never given you any reason why the topical counterplan is in any way abusive to my opponents. They were able to articulate disadvantages, so there's no reason why this counterplan is in any way hurting the education for today's debate. But my fifth response is that of appeal to tradition. Appeal to tradition. Now, this is basically a logical fallacy which argues the only reason why people are arguing topical counterplans is because the theory behind these is not really well understood. I hope I've been able to make that a little more clear, but we'd ask you to take a little new world approach on this and look into the actual theory and justifications for why counterplans or topical counterplans are legitimate. So now that we've covered that position, let's move to their arguments against the reason to prefer. Now, they basically argued here on my remove complexity argument that there's going to be a net gain. To this, I have two responses. My first response is no evidence, no evidence. Now, he simply came up here and he made an assertion that there's going to be this net gain, but nowhere did he ever give you any evidence whatsoever. He made an assertion, but there was no evidence. My second response, though, is net loss. Net loss. Now, like Brandon came up here and say, think about it. If the corporation is spending $159.4 billion every single year simply to comply with corporate tax loopholes, and you abolish the corporate tax altogether, that's money that now the corporation has to spend. If they want to give it to those other organizations, great, that's something they can do. Increased capital is always going to increase charitable giving. So if we really want to talk about these lives lost and these orphan drug hole loophole acts and all these different tax loopholes, the best way to increase money going to those loopholes is increase capital of the people who aren't giving to the loopholes in the first place. Let's move to the disadvantages. His first disadvantage against the counterplan was that lives are going to be lost. To this I have two responses. My first response is turn that we increase capital. Turn, we increase capital. If you'd really ever want to support this lives lost argument, what you'd want to do is give the people who are giving the money to the organizations more capital to donate. With our counterplan, we take $159.4 billion currently going towards simply tax compliance, and now the companies can have either number one, to stimulate the economy, or number two, to donate to these organizations. My second response, though, is that loopholes equal inefficiency. Loopholes equals inefficiency. Now, I was going to read a piece of evidence here, but he made the assertion for me. He read the card, $159.4 billion every year is lost. Then that doesn't really go anywhere. It doesn't go towards economic growth, and it definitely doesn't go towards these lives lost where he talks about this. So that's a completely inefficient system, whereas with the counterplan, that money could go towards saving lives. His second disadvantage, though, talked about deficit increases. To this, I have two responses. My first response is a turn that we increase revenue. A turn that we increase revenue. If you look to the actual effects of our plan, what you're going to do is you're going to actually see an increase of $33.3 billion in revenue. So basically, if you really believe the deficit is a problem, you'd be voting for the negative team. But my second response is a turn that we improve the economy. A turn that we improve the economy. Now, if you look back to Brandon's fourth reason to prefer, he read a piece of evidence from the Heartland Institute who said passing our plan will generate millions of jobs. If you look back to the affirmative team's own case, we see that we're going to be generating an increase in FDI and the most competitive country in the world. So basically, if you really want to talk about the deficit in the economy, I would urge you to be voting for the negative team. So to go over what we see in today's debate, if you really want to solve for the economic problems presented by my opponents, if you really want to increase government revenues and increase jobs and bring companies back to the United States, I would urge you to vote for the counterplan to abolish the corporate tax completely and altogether. Like the analogy Brandon gave, it's like Pilgrim's Progress. The affirmative team asks you to simply chip the burden off Christians' back, but we'd ask you to cut it off completely. Thank you.
All right. All right. Hi, Manoah, right?
Yes, you
got it. Hi, Manoah. How are you doing today?
Pretty good, Roman.
All right. So just a couple of questions about your speech. So first off, you made the assertion that we would actually, that the economy would grow enough that we would eventually gain revenue, correct?
I read a couple pieces of evidence under that.
All right. How long would it take to grow the economy that much?
It would actually, our evidence was saying it would be almost immediate effect because when the corporation sees that they have no corporate tax in the United States, the immediate economic benefit is for them to move to the United States.
Okay, so it would be so quick that we would in fact not lose any of that $360 billion revenue?
Well, first of all, I mean, obviously, if you abolish the corporate tax altogether 100% immediately, there may be a short-term decrease in revenue, but the overall effect is it will be increasing revenue $33.3 billion annually.
Okay, so you said there'll be a short-term. So my question is, how long will it take to get that $33 billion? How many years will that take?
Our evidence actually said it's immediately. It may take a little while. I can show you the card if you'd like.
Okay, can I see the evidence?
Sure.
Thank you so much.
You can ask me any question.
Actually, I might have a question about the evidence, so I just want to take it.
All right, there you are. It's the third one.
All right, can my partner take a look at this?
Sure.
All right, thank you. All right, so you said, so you were comparing the size of the Estonia's economy to the United States economy. Do you have any evidence that reforms made in Estonia's economy can be compared to reforms made in the United States economy?
I actually didn't make the reference to Estonia, but actually the evidence we did read in the last speech definitely said this study, it was a study done on Estonia's economy. And what the study said is this proves that corporate tax abolition is going to increase economic benefits in other countries.
Okay.
So it linked the success we've seen in Estonia to what would happen in the United States and other countries.
Okay, did it specifically say the United States or just other countries in general?
It's at other countries. Basically, the same economic effects could be seen.
All right, so let's talk about topicality for a second. So you made the assertion that in the rules it said that the affirmative upholds the resolution, correct?
That's correct.
All right, so if you're upholding the resolution, then you are also doing the job of the affirmative, right?
Absolutely not, because originally, here's what the rules originally said. Originally, the rule says the affirmative team affirms the resolution and the negative team negates the resolution. Now, just a few months ago, the rules were rewritten because those abused topical counterclaims. And what it said is the affirmative team has the burden to uphold the resolution. If they fail that burden, they lose the round.
Okay,
then there's no specific quantification on what the negative team has to do.
Okay, so it doesn't mention the negative team at all?
No.
Okay, but so the rules defines the affirmative team as the team that upholds the resolution, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, so if you're upholding the resolution, you fulfill the definition of affirmative team, right?
Not quite, because the negative team can either affirm the resolution or negate the affirmative team's plan.
Do the rules say that?
Absolutely, because what we're not doing here is we're not trying to affirm the resolution, we're negating your plan. Through my argument of parametrics, I argued that once you pass your plan, that's how the affirmative team has interpreted the resolution for today's debate. With our counterplan, we are negating your plan.
Right, but you just said that the rules do not mention the negative team and that the rules define affirmative as upholding the resolution. So if you uphold the resolution, given there's no mention of the negative team, are you not fulfilling the definition of affirmative team?
Absolutely not, because we
How
are
so?
negating your plan. The purpose of our counterplan is to negate your plan.
Okay, but you're still affirming the fact that the United States federal government should substantially reform its revenue generation policies, correct?
Well, that was a topic we were given to today's debate. We're all debating revenue generation. I think that definitely makes sense for us all to be debating on that topic.
All right, interesting. No further questions.